Okay, guys. Hello, hello. I hope you recovered from our little quiz show last week. I haven't put it up online yet, but I will do so during the week so that you can replay it and see how well you're doing the second time around. I haven't put up the new assignment yet, but I will do so later in the afternoon. Remember, next week you'll have tutorials for this lecture again. So later in the afternoon you'll get the new assignment on Blackboard. Okay, today I want to talk to you about from concept to measurement. From concept to measurement. And basically, as you will see, it's very much about zooming in on things. So we have these grand ideas. Maybe you have some theories, maybe we developed some concepts and constructs, but now at the end, what are we going to do with it? Right? You can talk about things all day long, but how are you going to actually collect some data about it to say something meaningful other than just theorizing about things without actually knowing whether that is true or not? Yeah, so it's actually, at the end, we need to break this down. So in order to get this started, today I'm going to start this differently. Let's kick this off with a little exercise at the beginning, just to get you activated. So for the next 2 minutes, I want you to discuss with your neighbor how you could measure something like religiosity. Yeah. That's exactly the thing that I want you to think about. Yeah. Okay, so now we have the question is, so what is it? What is religiosity? Yeah? Which is a very reasonable question. That's actually what I wanted you to think about here. Because we have theories, we have sometimes grand theories, where people say, okay, religiosity is affected by this, or social class, or this. What is it? What the hell is it? Yeah? How do you actually get to it at the end of the day? So you need to break these things down in a little bit. Yeah? Without doing so, and now what you might have realized is that there are many different ways how to break things down. So maybe, what about you guys? What did you have an idea? How could we actually measure this? Something to do with religion. Well, that's a good start. But how could you collect data on this? What would you do? Different religions. Interview. Church going. Okay, we're getting there. We're closing in a little bit. You know? So now you heard a few things. Interviewing people. What about you? Do you have some ideas? Well, guys, think about, I don't know, going to church. That's a very straightforward thing. I don't know, you ask people how many times do you go to church? Or how many times did you go to church during the last month, for example, right? And actually that's a measure that people use a lot for measuring religiosity. But then you might say, hang on, what's wrong with going to church? What's wrong with going to church? Some people don't go to church, but maybe they're still religious, right? So they could still be religious. So maybe just having this one dimension of going to church is maybe not that good anymore. Maybe it used to be good. Or another thing, I don't know, think about people being baptized. Nowadays everybody, I don't know, I was baptized, I was 3 months old, I had no choice. Probably the same thing for you. Yeah? I just thought, oh, there's some water again. You know? So you see, I don't know, you could actually be taught, you said, asking people, interviewing people, asking how religious are you. That's actually a strategy you actually externalize it to the other people, right? Let them define it, what being religious means for them. But then you have the problem, what kind of problem do you have then when you externalize it to other people? Different readings, different people think different things about it. Exactly. Yeah? Then maybe being religious means something completely different for you than for me. Or you could go out and you can have, we'll talk about that today as well, you can have different people, let's say you have different research team members, and sometimes it's not just one person doing research, but sometimes it's many different persons. You talk to people, and then I classify you as religious. Yeah, I kind of have a conversation about you, about God or whatnot, you know, about the church and whatnot. And then afterwards, I give you a score from 0 to 10. But maybe a colleague of mine would have given you a completely different score on this. Right? So there you see, it's actually not that straightforward. It's actually not that straightforward and very difficult. And often this is sort of the nitty-gritty detail of research, but it's very, very important. So this is sort of what we're going to spend now for the next few weeks on how to actually do this, yeah? And how then to ask questions. And then you'll see, depending on how you ask these questions, you get completely different results on this. Yeah? Okay, so, but I think what the idea here was to get you started with, okay, hang on, how do we measure things down? Yeah, now breaking things down from these general theories in a way to concepts, to actual measurements, to some data that we have. So this is basically what we talk about today. So we are in this planning phase, you know, we thought about design and now measurement before we actually think about our methods and the sampling that we have. So I brought 4 topics with me today. A few more definitions, not too much. I just want to put things again in context, like theory, concept, construct, and then actually variables and measures and items and things like that. Then conceptualization, which is basically this process of breaking things down, yeah, to something, or operationalization, like having something measurable. And then we'll talk about quality, and that concept about reliability and validity, and then we'll start talking about 4 levels of measurements. Yeah. Then we'll talk about nominal scales, ordinal scales, ratio scales, and interval scales. But let me get started quickly with some more definitions. I don't want to spend too much time on this. You know, we already had like what is a theory, and like this Grund construct. I don't know, we had like this thing of cognitive dissonance, so that's kind of why I'm referring back to it. You had lots of these things. Social class, yeah, class struggle, things like that. There's all this stuff that, you know, Kieran tells you, Matthew tells you. You know, you kind of get these general sociological theories in a way. I think, oh, that's so interesting, but then I urge you to think about, okay, what does it actually mean? What is religiosity? And actually, you know, this is actually not too difficult. You know, actually, I thought you would have some more tangible ideas, but you realize how difficult you found it already. Yeah? Now think about something like social isolation, anomie. Yeah? How do you measure these kind of things? They're kind of grand concepts in a way, and that's sometimes the challenge. And the really good people, they manage to jump that bridge, and kind of to go from the one side to the other, and kind of have both, have their theoretical idea, but as well like good measurements, something that is meaningful, something that actually other people find too. Yeah. Okay, so theory. Then we had a concept that's like a generalizable property or characteristics associated with objects, events, or people, like internal dissonance or mental readjustment. Religiosity would be now one of these, for example. Yeah. Then construct, that's a little more specific in the context that we had with cognitive dissonance, it was being happy. Then a variable, that's also nothing new, that's just a recap of what we already had. That's a measurable representation of a construct. And then we have, now I'm pushing this a little further, now we have what we call an indicator. It's a single measure, a single question. And often multiple indicators, items are used to form a variable. For example, religiosity would be a classic thing where you have multiple items. Or happiness is a classic thing where you ask people many different things. So it's not just one question. Right? There are different aspects of it. And sometimes they capture different dimensions of this construct. For example, how many times did you go to church? Are you baptized? Are you spiritual? I don't know. Do you talk to other people about God? These kind of things would be different indicators that kind of, none of them is perfect, but together they circle around this idea of religiosity. Or about happiness, which is another example that we had here. So an indicator is one specific, or we call it also an item, as one specific question where you then get a result. An attribute is a characteristic or a quality of something. So, I ask you something and then you give me a category, 1, 2, 3, 4, whatnot. That's sort of like the attribute that I have. Or if I record your gender, I get, female, male, that's an attribute. Okay. But that was really just a quick recap, so that you know what, I might be referring to items during this lecture or indicators and so on, that you know a little bit where this is situated. But what I actually want to talk about is this conceptualization idea. Conceptualization or operationalization. Often these things come along with each other. And I asked you about what religiosity is. I could have asked you other things. I could have asked you, what is love? What is love? That's an important concept. People study it. I think social scientists should study it. But how do you actually measure it? How would you go and measure this? Well, now I could ask. So I asked you how many times you go to church with love. There would be other things, but same thing with happiness. What is happiness? How do you measure this? Maybe you have an idea, or maybe you thought you know what it is, but how would you actually collect data on this? Or hate? Or isolation? That's actually a big one in sociology, anomie. Maybe you came across that, Talcott Parsons, he was a big guy in that. How people are isolated, socially excluded. What is social exclusion? Or what is social capital? Right now I have a master's student who wants to work on social capital, but what is social capital? Maybe you have an idea, it's on how your networks help you to find jobs, which is a reasonable definition of it, but how would you actually measure it? Or religiosity. That's sort of like the starting question that we have. So what is the problem with these kind of things? Now, hopefully now you see that often, most of these concepts we want to study in social research, they do not physically exist. It's not like there's a rock, or there's a mug, or there's a table, or something like that. It's not like in the hard sciences, where you can actually see things. But they are there nevertheless, right? There's still religiosity out there. There's still love, hate. So it's much harder to measure these things for us because it's sometimes a little fuzzy, and because we don't really have something very tangible to get hold of. And often, on the top of that, we have different conceptions of what these things mean. So sometimes these things mean different things to different people. Now this is sort of the process where conceptualization comes into play. So that's basically the mental process by which fuzzy and imprecise concepts become constructs and are defined in concrete and precise terms. And maybe now you can also see the difference between concept and construct a little bit. It's like narrowing things down, becoming more precise. Okay, sometimes, I don't know, you could reasonably ask these questions, do things really exist? Sometimes, for example, psychologists, they came up with, personality traits. I don't really know by heart now what the dimensions of personality traits are, but why should these be the personality traits and not others? Right? There could be many different ways of classifying things. Or maybe does something like personality trait even exist? So sometimes these things are creations in our mind. And that makes it even harder because there is nothing tangible down there. It's really just how we define things. And often when you go and interview people, they don't know anything about this. Maybe about religiosity, people know about that a little bit, so you could externalize that question and ask them. But if you want to know them, I don't know, if you ask them something more, or maybe they would know if you ask them, are you extroverted or are you introverted? Maybe they get that. But maybe if you ask them something, I don't know, if you're more, different aspects of personality that they never heard about, yeah, and they wouldn't even know where to situate themselves. Okay, and then another thing that you might have come across or that we heard already when we talked about religiosity at the beginning is you realize, there might be different dimensions that matter here. Yeah, maybe it's not just one thing. Maybe there's sort of different aspects to it. Maybe church going could be one thing of religiosity, but it might not be the whole thing. There could be lots of other things in there that kind of might be relevant or might be associated to it. And then you see, as a researcher, you need to be aware of these kind of things. Because maybe you ask people one question about religiosity, but you kind of don't know about the other dimensions. That means you cannot track it. You don't see it. So that would mean people don't go to church anymore. They're not religious anymore. Well, in fact, there might be a whole other dimension of religiosity that your measure doesn't capture, or maybe you hadn't thought about it in the first instance. So this is sort of where this, I don't know, now we can talk about, now we're getting a little more precise already, and now we can talk about unidimensional and multidimensional constructs. Unidimensional construct, there's one single dimension which captures the whole thing. Now, for example, the weight of a cow. I asked you the weight of the cow. There are no multiple dimensions to this. It's just the weight of a cow. Or wind speed or height of a person. While with religiosity, there might be many different dimensions to it. So some things are very easy to measure, either because they are unidimensional. Yeah? Some hard questions. I don't know, you ask people about their salary. You collect data about their gender. You collect data about their education. Although education might already be not that straightforward anymore. Yeah? Maybe there are different components of it. Yeah? Or let's say when you go to something like intelligence, that's not unidimensional anymore. There are different aspects to intelligence that you might not be able to capture that easily with just a simple number. Although we try, yeah. But and then actually an IQ coefficient, that's kind of, it puts a lot of different information together. That's not just one question. When you take an IQ test, you're not just being asked one question. That would be stupid. You know? So in the exam, I also ask you multiple questions because that's a much better way for me to get sort of, okay, how much did you actually prepare, how much did you understand things, how much did you, how good are you in this course, right? So if you just have one thing, it might not capture the whole thing. So we have unidimensional constructs, and then in contrast to that, now you see we have multidimensional constructs. I talked about that. I talked about intelligence as an example. You know, then there might be emotional intelligence, logical intelligence, interpersonal intelligence. You know, but again, these are kind of things that some clever people came up with. But again, these sort of are categorizations that might not necessarily be separated in your mind like that. It's just a different way of getting to it from different angles. Okay, so we have unidimensional and we have multidimensional constructs. Things that we can measure with one single thing, and other things where you need to have a breadth of it. And oftentimes in social science research you have the latter one, and then you have sometimes a whole battery of questions. For example, if you want to know something about personality traits of people, the Big Five, you ask people the different versions of it, up to 50 questions or sometimes 70 questions or 10 questions, smaller versions of that kind of try to situate people within these multiple dimensions. Okay, so conceptualization is thinking about, okay, how do we break things down? Similar line, we talk about operationalization. Operationalization is basically the development of a specific research procedure that allows us to measure theoretical constructs. We develop indicators for measuring constructs. So we think about, basically what I asked you to do is to operationalize religiosity. First of all, you did some conceptualization already. Think about, okay, what does actually mean? What I don't know, what do you want from me? Yeah? But then you kind of started, I probed a little further and I asked you, okay, what would you ask? What are the specific things that you could do to get those different aspects of it, maybe capturing different dimensions? And then we talked about, for example, going to church in the last months. That's an operationalization of one particular aspect of it. Okay, another example that is, for us in sociology is super important. Now we talk about socioeconomic status all the time, or social class. What is socioeconomic status? That's a fancy word, but what does it actually mean? And we say, okay, well, some people are higher up, others are lower up. And then you can, okay, well, maybe it has something to do with family, with your wealth, with your income, and with your salary. Then maybe it has something to do with education, yeah, and also with your occupation. So actually, it brings together, these are sort of the three big things, like tangible income, then education or status, also expressed in occupation, which kind of job that you have. Some people could be highly educated, but they end up in, I don't know, in less regarded occupations. Yeah. Not to say that any occupations should be higher regarded than others in a way, but you know, nothing fancy. People get a PhD and they end up collecting rubbish bits, which is possible. Yeah. There's no reason why. I don't know why that should be a worse life. Probably in terms of salary it is than becoming a professor. Probably in terms of salary that is, but probably in terms of status there's a little difference, right? But you see, again, just my job would not have captured the whole thing, or just my education would not have captured the whole thing either. That's sort of why in sociology, socioeconomic status or SES, that's sort of like one of the classic indicators that we look at, and underlying it are these different dimensions. You know? And I'm asking these different questions that I have here, that would be an operationalization of these different aspects of socioeconomic status. Okay, well, you know, this is old news. You know, often there's just more than one indicator, not just one single indicator that would capture the whole thing. Single indicators. Now we're talking about something else. You know, they might be incorrectly classified by people. Now, if I just ask you one question and you don't understand that question, then you're misclassified. Or if I give you 10 questions and maybe you don't understand one of these 10, but you understand the other 9, now you're still much closer to the classification that you actually belong to. So that's sort of another thing, why often the more fuzzy it gets, the more questions we have, because then the idea is that then we kind of avoid this thing that people end up in one or the other category simply because they haven't understood this particular question. Okay, single indicators may only capture a portion of the underlying concept, you know. Multiple indicators can make finer distinctions and so on. Okay, and so I talked about these kind of things already. Okay, so that's sort of conceptualization and operationalization. So now we're really breaking things down. So now we need to think about, okay, what is, you know, I asked you a little bit and you kind of wondered, okay, what is now good operationalization of religiosity? Now, when is it bad? So we need to think about, okay, the quality of our measures. If we have bad measures, your research is screwed. Yeah? You cannot say anything meaningful when you kind of measure things in the wrong way. So when I look at other people's research, I look at how do they actually really down there measure things. Because if I don't agree with that, or I think they made a stupid mistake, or they made a stupid question, I don't believe in all the rest they're doing. Because then their data is screwed. Their data is sort of biased at best, or it's just completely meaningless. Yeah. So in that context, a funny question, a funny thing, you know, I had this master's student that I'm currently supervising, and then I told her, listen, the best thing you can do is use exactly the same question that other people already used in other surveys, in other existing research about something. Yeah. Because then, you know, this is tested. Other people already used it, and then we can actually also compare. So if you ask somebody whether they are religious in a certain way, and I ask somebody whether that person is religious in a certain way, and if we kind of both use the same idea, or maybe even the same kind of questions, we can compare these things. If you ask that person that question in a completely different way than me, how are we going to compare these things? It might be all about, I don't know, how we ask the question, and that's actually, we're going to have a whole lecture on this, how you ask questions, and the effects that kind of come into that. Okay, so that's sort of like single and multiple indicators, but essentially like unidimensional constructs and multidimensional constructs. Okay, so now we need to have some sort of measure for the quality of what we're doing. So what we are measuring. And now we have two concepts that come into play here that are sometimes maybe a little tricky to understand, but I hope to be as clear as possible in that, and at the end, hopefully you get it and it's very straightforward. So, two concepts that we call reliability and validity. And if you ask me, such an exam question, distinguish reliability from validity. By the way, if you kind of listen to what I'm talking, you should know what the exam questions are. It's so straightforward, I think. So reliability and validity in the context of measures. So you check. First of all, reliability in a nutshell. Reliability means, do I get the same number, the same response if I keep asking that same question to the same people? Can I trust in that? Or is it something where maybe people don't understand the question and then sometimes they answer very high, sometimes they answer very low? Reliable means like, do you get the same stuff if you would go and do it again? While validity means, do you actually get what you want to get? And you will see that these things are not the same. Not the same, and the way how people present this often is like using this example. You want to get whatever is in the middle. That's sort of what you want to measure. Religiosity, you have an idea about how to measure it in the middle. That's sort of what you want to get. And now the black dots are, let's say, responses from people. I would have asked you things in some other way. And now you see three different possible ways of actually how your results could have been distributed. Maybe I asked you a question and people kind of had a very narrow understanding of what that question is or what it means. Right? But it's not actually what I wanted. So that would be the first one. It would be a measure that is reliable. You keep getting the same thing, but it's not valid. While in the second one, you have a measure that is valid, but it's not reliable. And you see there's a lot of error in there, a lot of breadth in there. And the last one, that's sort of valid and reliable. So I was thinking whether I should talk today about systematic error and random error. At the end, I opted against it. I might come back at it at some point. But essentially, you could think that, okay, there's some randomness to it, to the results that you get. Or I don't know, not to the results that you get, but to actually what you want to measure. Some people, I don't know, some people understand religiosity in one way, others understand it in another way, but then you could say, well, if you would put it together in a way, we're sort of what we originally wanted to have. So it would average out. That's random error. Random error averages out so that at the end you get the true value. Systematic error is something, if you would average it, you don't get to the true value. It's a bit like the first graph that you see here on the left. If I would take the average position of that, I would still be up there somewhere. I wouldn't be bang on in the middle. But okay, so I try to talk a little more about that and hopefully it becomes a little clearer. So reliability is the degree to which an instrument measures the same way each time it is used under the same conditions with the same subjects. And as I just outlined, reliability is not the same as accuracy. Accuracy is something else. Something can be reliable, but it still measures something that is not accurate. So I can keep getting the same thing again and again, but it's still not accurate. An example, I don't know, nowadays we don't have it anymore. Seriously, I don't have a watch anymore. Who has watches here? Nobody has watches. You have your phones and you have a watch, because then I was thinking, I don't have a watch anymore, and the time on my phone, it's connected to the internet, it's perfectly accurate, bang on, problem solved. But back in the days when we used to have watches, you might have had a watch, or maybe you still have a clock at home, and imagine it's 10 minutes off. It's 10 minutes late. That means you always get 10 minutes late. That means there's not much variation about that. You look at the clock and it's sort of, it's sort of the same time, but whenever you look at it, it's 10 minutes late from what it actually is. While if you, let's say, you have 10 clocks at home, and they show different times, some a little earlier, others a little later, My parents said, there's so many clocks at home. I don't know why. You know, cuckoo clocks and all this kind of crap, you know, that you have in the southwestern Germany. Anyway, so they have all these clocks at home, yeah? And I wonder, okay, I don't know, what is the time here? So I always scan all of them, and then I kind of take the average of it, and then I'm sort of okay. And then I compare it with my phone, which is synced automatically, you know? And there I see, okay, it's actually accurate. That would mean it would be valid, you know, because I'm bang on. But reliability, it wouldn't really be it wouldn't be reliable because I get on different watches different things. So reliability means when you kind of measure the same thing and you get the same thing again and again. Now let's imagine that my parents have like these 10 clocks at home, yeah, and all of them are 10 minutes late. All of them are 10 minutes late. So actually there's no variation at all. You say, oh wow, this is very reliable. All of them are very close together. I think I know the time. It's very reliable. I look at all of them and they are all very close. It's very reliable. But it's not valid because it's 10 minutes late. So that's sort of like the difference between reliability and validity. And with reliability, we can talk about, 3 types of reliability. They are useful. We call it inter-rater reliability, test-retest reliability, and split-half reliability. Now, that's kind of stuff that you have more about in the readings. Yeah? But let me briefly talk about it nevertheless. So, I mentioned earlier that sometimes you might do different, might have different people involved in a research project. Or let's say at the end of the term there's going to be an exam. Now I'm not going to be grading the whole exam. I can't do that. It's 500 exams seriously. I'm busy for 4 weeks, nothing else. So I have my little minions. So I have my PhD students, and together we do that. Yeah? So one guy, let's say Ryan, grades some of you guys, but not others. Yeah? And then somebody else grades another part of it. I don't know, what should be the case here is that actually this is reliable, right? That they would get the same thing if they would grade other people. Because otherwise it would be unfair, right? I don't know, it's just everybody should be evaluated equally. So that's what we mean with inter-rater reliability. The different people would come to the same rating. So it's relevant when people have to classify or rate something. And then it measures the consistency between 2 or more raters. And when inter-rater reliability is high, different people rate things similarly. And you see how this sort of now applies with the clock, like there are different ones and they are all sort of the same. It's like different people in research kind of classify people and they all classify them in the same way. And that's actually not that straightforward. Actually I had this research project which is really, really, we looked at this football stuff and we looked at discrimination in the English Premier League. And we asked a serious question. We asked whether referees give more yellow cards to black players. So just skin color. Yeah? Whether there's some really visible discrimination happening here. Just because you are not white, you get more yellow cards. Actually, we did find it. We made a splash in the news and whatnot, as you can imagine. So we were in the newspaper with it. But first of all, we had to rate our data. So we had to look at the profiles of all football players and are they black or white? Yeah? And sometimes it's actually not that straightforward. Sometimes you don't really know. Yeah? I don't know, maybe this person just came back from a vacation. Yeah? And that's sort of how they look like. So it's not that black and white often. Yeah? It's not that straightforward often. And then what we do, different people, actually we're different research assistants rating these kind of things. The same stuff. And then we looked at how do they overlap. Yeah? And then you say, if they are, I don't know, I think the normal measure that people have is if there's 80% overlap, then it's sort of fine. Yeah? But if it's less than that, I don't know, something is odd here, something is fishy. You need to do something else. So that's sort of what we mean with inter-rater reliability. And let's say here the example with religiosity, let's say different people are classifying how religious individuals are by talking to them. Inter-rater reliability would be high if different of my minions asked you about religiosity and they come to the same conclusion. Then we would have high inter-rater reliability. Okay. Second version of it is retest reliability. What does that mean? Well, it means it's a measure of consistency between two measurements of the same construct administered to the same sample at different points in time. So if I ask you how religious you are today, and this is sort of like a more general latent construct here, if I go and ask you next week, it should be around the same thing. It's not that it's changing dramatically. Or if I ask you something at the beginning of the term or at the end of the term about something that we don't talk about here in the lecture, it should be the same thing equally around it. So that's sort of often employed to see whether your measure is actually good. Yeah? Because let's say if I would ask you the same question and then next time you forgot about, I don't know, what I did the last time, and that's sort of the whole idea. You forget about what I asked the last time and then you kind of, if then you would say something completely different, then maybe something is wrong with my question. Then maybe my question is just not that good because people interpret it differently. Yeah? So it basically shows you that there's some uncertainty in it. Yeah? Some uncertainty, and one day it goes this way, one day you interpret it in a completely different way. Why? Because my question wasn't good to begin with. If I have a very good, precise question, I should get the same thing. Yeah? When I ask you the same stuff again. Okay. A third version of reliability, we call it split half reliability. It's basically if I would split my indicators in half. I imagine I ask you 5 questions. I ask you 4 questions about religiosity. Yeah? I don't know. How many times you go to church? 1 question. Are you baptized? The second one. Did you talk with somebody about God during the last 3 months? This is the 3rd question. Maybe a 4th question. Do you intend to get married in a church? Why have you get married in a church? So that would be 4 different indicators, 4 different questions to get to that idea of religiosity. Yeah, maybe none of them is perfect, but maybe hopefully together they kind of come closer to what we actually want to have. Now, what is split half reliability? Split half reliability would be now if I would, instead of asking you all of those 4, well, actually I asked you all of those 4 questions, but now I split them in half. So I kind of look at only the first and the second question, look at them, maybe calculate an average, I don't know, yeah, something like that, or maybe have a scale out of this and so on. And I look at the 3rd and the 4th question, do the same thing, an average of it. Yeah. And then, if these things are sort of this is sort of something where you actually want them not to vary too much. Yeah? Because it means, okay, I'm actually on the right track here, even with my halves. If they sort of come up with the same things, you know, if you would be classified super religious on the first and the third and the second question, but not religious at all on the 3rd and the 4th question, then maybe something is wrong with my questions. So this is often used, you know, when you have these batteries, you know, like I don't know, 20 questions to get to one thing. You know? And the more questions you can ask on that, the better you get. Yeah, the closer you get, but then the downside is I don't know, I cannot ask you like 100 questions about religiosity. You would run away. Yeah? You couldn't care less. Yeah? And that's sort of the problem that we have. That is like an offset between finding the amount of question or indicators that is needed to come to what we actually want to measure, while at the same time only using as little as we can get away with. Because if I would keep asking you different things, then that's another big problem. You know, people did research on that. You know, people get hired and asking surveys and so on. You would only do it for a certain amount of time. Okay, now let's split half reliability. Let me talk about validity now. So we talk about reliability, getting the same value again and again. That's basically what reliability is about. And there are sort of different versions of it. Let's say, I don't know, you have different raters and you want to get same value from different raters, or you want to get the same value before and after, or you want to get the same value when you kind of look at half of the question and the other half of the question. You always want to get the same value. That's reliability. Then you can trust in it. Then I can believe it. But remember the example that I had with the clock. They could be all the same, but you're still 10 minutes late or 10 minutes early. So you might not be on it. So you might have high reliability, but you might have low validity. And what we want in research, we want to have both. You want to have high reliability, so that you can trust in your measure, but you also want to be sure that your measure actually measures what you want to measure, not something else, not like just something that is 10 minutes late. So this is sort of now where validity comes into play. And validity measure is valid when it accurately reflects the concept it is intended to measure. Sounds like a no-brainer, but you know what? I just showed you, it's actually not that straightforward. I don't know. And it's even more tricky when you have fuzzy concepts to begin with, when you haven't really clarified what you mean by that. Yeah? Socioeconomic status, social isolation, hate, love. You know, you need to be very clear in what you mean with these kind of things, or you need to provide, and then you see that usually you have different interpretations. In good research, they are very upfront about this. So they can say, okay, this is sort of what I want to get. Let's say, I don't know, hate or social capital, and this is what I'm going to measure. And now I'm going to interpret whatever I'm going to measure like that. But that's sort of my way of interpreting this right now. This is my way of going with it. And then somebody else who does research can see, okay, hang on, maybe I buy into that way of measuring things, maybe I don't, right? Or maybe if I would do, I would want to do it differently, or maybe if I do it, I want to do it exactly the same way, so that I measure exactly the same kind of things that those other people do. So validity is a measure, is valid when it accurately reflects the concept it is intended to measure. Now, similar like we have with reliability and for validity, some people say there are 4, I don't know, I just focus on these 3 because I think they make most sense, and you know, whenever something doesn't make sense, I think maybe the classification is not that good. But let me talk about 3 types of validity: face validity, content validity, and construct validity. We are in the concept of measuring things. You know, we want to measure things. We want to make sure that what we measure is actually what we get. So face validity is sort of like the first look at, I don't know, is the measure reasonable on its face, on its surface? Does it make sense? And you know, for example, when you would ask people about religiosity, we had that. You know, how often, I could ask you, how often do you typically attend religious services in a month? That makes sense. Yeah? That's a reasonable indicator for that kind of thing. But if I would have asked you, how often have you been to St. Patrick's Cathedral in Dublin, or maybe in another city, how often have you been to St. Peter's in Rome? Maybe you have. Actually, Rome is an amazing city. Yeah, I love it. But it doesn't make necessarily sense to get what you want to get. Yeah? We talk about, okay, well, maybe people just, I don't know, maybe they go to church, but not to this particular one. Yeah? So even kind of church attendance would be kind of like a little odd to measure it like that. Yeah? Because it's sort of mismatched between what you actually measure and what you had thought about, even how you break things down, because you break things down into church attendance. Yeah? So that sort of like would be how you would break it down. So face validity is really just the first question: does it make sense? Yeah? Does it make sense? Is it reasonable? Then we have something we call content validity. On content validity, you know, often the things we measure, they are multidimensional. There's not just one thing to it, but there are multiple dimensions to it. And if you succeed to capture all of these different dimensions, then we have content validity. If we don't have content validity. So the example, you know, let's say I could ask people how would they memorize religious prayers. Could have done a test with you. Do you know your Ave Maria? Or I don't know. Seriously, I don't memorize these things. Probably you do. But then that's just one aspect of it. Again, I don't know. Maybe people are religious. Maybe I'm religious. I don't know. Who knows? But I'm just not good in memorizing prayers. So you see, I would have left out a dimension here. If you do get all these dimensions, you do have content validity. Okay, the last one. I want to talk about construct validity. What is construct validity? Construct validity is the degree to which a measure relates to other variables as expected within the system of theoretical relationships. Okay. So that basically means things that we expect. And I told you actually, people that look at religiosity, asking people about how often they go to church. That's a well-used measure. People use that all the time. So we know that kind of if whatever measure we come up with for religiosity, and we do capture religiosity, it should be correlated. That means it should behave in a similar way as if I would have asked people about how many times they go to church. Remember, correlation means like the one goes up, the other one goes up. Yeah. So if I come up with a question with a fancy way of measuring religion, if it is a good one, it should behave in the same way as already other established measures for it. Also, it should go along with other theoretical constructs. Yeah. For example, like something like, I don't know, something like age. We know that there's a relation between age and religiosity. Yeah. So if whatever way I measure religiosity, it should have a similar relationship with age. As, for example, the relationship that people have when you ask them about how many times they go to church and their age. That's construct validity. Take-home message really is reliability does not imply validity. There are different things. As a researcher, you want to have both. Keep in mind, this is sort of a way to memorize these things. So originally, I also wanted to talk about 4 levels of measurement, but we didn't have the time for this. So we'll talk about that next time. And no reading for Wednesday. Yeah, no reading for Wednesday. Okay, see you on Wednesday.